Crispin Sartwell, it's good to see you again.
Dan Kaufman, good to be here.
The audience should know that the reason that Crispin looks so snazzy, wearing a suit jacket and everything, is because he had to go to a meeting.
Yeah, true. I don't usually dress up for meetings, but I don't know. I just thought I would.
And the reason I look like this is because I'm at home. So our quick typical introductions. Crispin Sartwell is professor of philosophy at Dickinson College. Am I correct?
Yes.
What do you
professor.
Assistant professor.
Associate
professor. Good. At least it means you're past the worst hurdle. Just before we get started, what's on your teaching plate this semester? What are you teaching?
I'm really happy this semester. I've got just 2 small classes, existentialism and beauty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm doing some of my favorite texts and some of my favorite, subjects.
Now, are those classes that are regularly offered, or are these sort of one-offs? There's a class on beauty?
Well, I guess I invented that 10 years ago or something like that. I teach every couple of years, so.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, it's like aesthetics too, sort of, or.
I'm teaching aesthetics right now. And also my standard gen ed load. So do you not have to teach a gen ed load every semester?
No, we don't have that. I mean, I teach first year seminars. I did last fall, intro classes, but we don't have that same kind of system, I guess.
Yeah, every semester, 2/3 of my load is gen ed.
Which means what? Like, what do you?
2 out of 3 classes are introductory level, where 99% of the students are taking it for general education credit, not as the start of a philosophy major.
Yes.
And so now I'm not complaining. I like teaching gen ed. I have to tell you, I find very satisfying the distillation of these sort of major ideas and historical figures.
Yes.
To a formula that anybody can understand. Like, to me is why I like doing public intellectual work. And so I don't resent the gen ed, but what it means is that I really only get to teach one varying content course every semester. So it's aesthetics this semester. Next fall, it'll be philosophy of literature. I
really feel like, teaching, like, say, in a graduate a program with a graduate university with a graduate program, and that sort of thing, or in a very large department with assistants and things like this. I mean, there's places that can take you in your research, you know what I mean? That is not really possible when it's all undergraduate load, especially, intro level or whatever. But I sort of agree with that whole thing.
But I don't think it adds to your teaching very much. I think the teaching really improves by teaching the lower level stuff.
Yes, I agree with that too.
You really have to know it well.
Yes. And you have to be able to say it clearly.
Yeah. All right. So today we are going to talk about truth, and I'm very pleased again to pull out this classic, which we did 2 dialogues on, but actually we didn't really. You've got it. Wait, is that a paperback?
Yeah, there is a paperback.
Well, I got the hardcover, so you know where your dinner came from.
Exactly. Appreciate it, man.
We did a two dialogue coverage of this book, but we did not talk about the chapter on truth. We talked a lot about epistemology. We talked a lot about ontology. We didn't talk a lot about truth. This is one of the areas where you and I think, have pretty substantially different views. And so I'm looking forward to this. I reread the chapter on truth for the conversation. So the first thing I want to do is I want to sort of could you give a brief sketch, not of your view or of the book, but just a brief sketch of what is at issue when analytic philosophers talk about truth? What are some of the, let's say, bullet issues that reflect the concerns of analytic philosophers with respect to the question of truth, that then we'll talk about what your view on them is?
Okay. I guess one way into that is the concept of truth bearers and truth makers. So so the sky is blue on a sunny day. Whatever that is that I just said is a truth bearer in the sense that it's the sort of thing that could be true or false, or it's a truth value bearer. So is that
the statement, the sentence, whatever?
Yes, the proposition,
right?
The utterance,
right? And it matters. It's going to matter which of these you say is the truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I say the sky's blue on a sunny day, there's a big controversy over what I've just done. Have I formulated a proposition? Have I uttered a sentence? How should we primarily think about, what is the thing? What is the object that is true or false?
Right. Very good.
What sorts of objects can be true or false? And then look, this is a more sort of contemporary or last 20 years vein, this idea of truth makers. I guess it probably is an old idea, but has, I guess, gotten more prevalent in literature. So what is it that makes the sky is blue on a sunny day true?
Or false.
Or whatever false. The hell, yeah. So, maybe...
So some of the candidates are the world, reality, the facts.
Yeah. Yes.
There's a whole bunch of candidates.
Yes, exactly. The sky.
For truth makers, yes.
The sky itself, or, so I guess the ontological status, or the various kinds of status of both of these ends of the truth transaction, are kind of hard to make concrete or just to say specifically what they are exactly.
Yeah.
But at least that gives you kind of a decent way to formulate some of the traditional theories of truth.
Yeah. Right. So then you'll get your correspondence theories, which say, in other words, the theories presuppose a conception of the truth bearer and the truth maker, and then purport to describe the relationship between the truth bearer and the truth maker. Am I correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So we could try to say, what is it that makes this true or false? In virtue of what property or relation?
Yeah.
To what is the truth bearer true when true, false when false?
Right. So a standard correspondence theorist, as they're called, is going to say that the relation is some sort of conformity or correspondence between the truth bearer and the truth maker. Right.
Yes.
A coherence theorist is going to, this is where it gets kind of tricky, because a coherence theorist, it seems to me, doesn't need to have a conception of the truth maker in the same sense. What it says is that what makes a statement true is how well it coheres with other statements that we already consider to be true. Am I correct?
Right. So those other statements, I guess, could be construed as truth makers. But in that case, it would be like a whole system of belief, or, web of knowledge or something like that.
Right.
So in going looking for truth makers, you wouldn't go outside of the head of the person who's uttering the truth bearer, let's say, or something like that.
Right.
That language doesn't naturally go with a coherence theory, I suppose.
Right. And each theory, these are the two main theories. You have yet a different view. And then there's a kind of an anti-theoretical view, which is actually the view that I hold a version of, and there are multiple versions of it. But correspondence and coherence are the most standard theories, and each one kind of has a distinctive weakness that the other doesn't share. Right. So the problem with the correspondence theory is to try to come up with some account of this truth maker, which is notoriously difficult, and which we'll talk about. And the problem with coherence is to come up with some notion of...
Go
ahead.
It's not only the concept of the truth maker, it's the relation of correspondence itself is also a deep puzzle, and very hard to make plausible.
Right. That's a good part of what Wittgenstein tries to do in the Tractatus, right?
Yes.
To try and to give a clear and specific account of the relation. And
isomorphism, let's say.
Yeah, and as we know, or at least those of us who are in the know of this know, even with his ridiculous ability, it's not clear that it works, right?
Right. I think he gave up on it, right?
Yeah. And the problem with coherence it's not at all clear how truth in any way connects up to the world. In other words, a complete fiction can have a complete fiction's statements can be coherent, right? With one,
Yes.
cohere with one another. And so it's going to become very hard to sort of give any sort of principle distinction between complete fictions and, let's say, science, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And so, like, for example, I'm reading a fantasy series of fantasy novels right now. It's about 3,000 pages so far. And, and it's kind of a pretty, I'm trying to remember the title. Brandon Sanderson is the author. There's a lot of world building. Okay, so like he makes this kind of coherent reality, and he gives it history, he gives it languages, he gives it religions. All right. Now, I haven't noticed any deep incoherence in it. It's a pretty consistent, like, set of physical laws, environmental conditions, different sorts of creatures and things like this. So why on a coherence theory isn't that true, or as true as a scientific theory about the world, for example?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And so each of these theories has its own distinctive problems. And the problems are such problems that a number of philosophers have become sort of anti-theorists. And these people are, broadly speaking, referred to as deflationists, of which there are a number of varieties. But essentially what they all suggest is that truth is actually not a substantial property. That to say that a statement is true is simply equivalent to making the statement, right?
Right, precisely. It's true that the sky is blue on a sunny day means the same, according to, say, Ramsey, as the sky is blue on a sunny day. Right. So just ditch the "it is true that."
Yeah, and I incline towards this sort of view. And I think a nice way to segue now into your view and into the book, which is what I want to spend the bulk of the time on, is for me to explain why why I've become a deflationist, because my reason is the same reason why you're not one. And so I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this. So, traditionally, or commonly, people come to deflationism because they weary of the effort to make some sense of coherence or correspondence theories. But and I don't want to say that that's not any part of the reason why I've moved towards deflationism, but I have an additional reason, and that is because I'm so indebted to to Wittgenstein, the later Wittgenstein, and the ordinary language tradition. I'm always interested in seeing how a word is actually used before
Me too, man.
Before I start giving an account. And I know that at least Austin is very much an influence for you. I know that you're much more ambivalent about Wittgenstein than I am.
True. I like that bit, though. But
so I made a sort of little catalog of varying uses of the word true. And so I'm just going to read them because it's not very many.
Sure.
So in addition to the standard true and false, which we normally apply to statements or sentences or utterances or whatever you want to apply them to, here are some other uses, right, of the word true. So what he said is nothing more than a truism, which means that it's trivial and uninteresting.
Okay.
She remained true to me through good times and bad, meaning faithful.
Yes.
His arrow flew straight and true, which means without deviation. Now here's slang. This is slang. That shit is the motherfucking truth, meaning meaning it's the best.
Yeah.
This is my grandmother's tried and true method of getting rid of red wine stains, which means it's effective.
Yeah.
Now, what this makes me think when I see something like this, what it makes me think is that there can't be one account.
Right.
Right. That there, in other words, that truth is a family resemblance concept, as Wittgenstein would say. There may be family resemblances between its varying uses, but you're not going to have a theory of truth. It's pointless to sort of go looking for one. The reason I say this is that you in your book even go into a more painstaking analysis of the varying uses of the word true.
Yes.
And yet you conclude that you can get a theory of truth out of it. And so that's why this is where I want you to now start talking about your view, and I'm going to move back to being a questioner.
Okay.
How come you came to the opposite conclusion of me in looking at these myriad uses of the word true?
Right. Okay, so let me just say, like, the first distinction I draw is among uses of the word truth is that some uses of the word seem to apply to what we might call semantic entities, or like objects that are things that have a meaning. So sentences, propositions, but also maybe pictures, for example. That's a semantic entity. Picture is a semantic entity in the sense that
anything that has reference.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Anything that refers or represents something outside itself. So, you know, when you say a sentence is true, a particular sentence is true, or a particular picture is a true depiction, that sort of thing, you're talking about semantic entities. And that's where, for example, the question of correspondence opens up. So, you know, for the correspondence theory to be true, truth bearers have to be exclusively semantic, right? Because if it's not a semantic entity that refers to something outside itself, you can't get a correspondence relation going.
Right.
Right. So, like, but most of the uses that you just gave use true to refer to something that is not a semantic entity.
Yeah, all those uses that I gave are non-semantic uses in your parlance. Yeah.
Right, like true love.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. So, all right. So the first question is whether we could give a univocal theory of truth that would cover both semantic and non-semantic entities, and that are uses. And, you know, I see why the first response would be not at all. I mean, these seem to be like obviously different senses. For one thing, you can't possibly theorize true love, the use of true and true love, in terms of correspondence, coherence, I don't think, you know, because they're not the right kind of entities. And usually philosophers just say, they never even really usually mention the other cases at all. But if they do, they just say, well, of course, I'm concerned with the, you know, the basic propositional case, which is the fundamental case. Now, I mean, I guess I'm not necessarily saying that there has to be one theory of truth to cover all these cases, although I'm trying for one in a way. But I just start by asking the question whether these are different concepts. Okay, like whether true love or true aim or true, let's see, what are my examples here? You know, or true man. All right, how closely is that, or how closely should we think of that, uses like that as being related to the propositional case or, you know, the semantic cases? And I guess like my initial response is, I don't, these uses of the term emerge from a single etymology. They're very, very closely related. All right. I hear them resonating on the same wavelength. And what I think they have in common.
Let me just interrupt you one thing. So do you think that beyond the point of a mere family resemblance account, I don't want to sort of force you into accepting a strict technical literal definition, but what I'm asking you is, I mean, a family resemblance account is the loosest, right?
Right.
And what I'm asking you is, do you think that there is a commonality amongst all the uses that is stronger?
Yes.
Typically reflected in a family resemblance account?
I think so.
Okay, please now continue. Yeah.
Right. But there could be satellite uses and satellite meanings as well. But yeah, I hear basically, you know, all these uses of the word true, or many of them, as configuring around basically just the idea of what's real. Okay, like to say of, I mean, it wouldn't be insane to say the sky is blue on a sunny day is true because the circumstance described is real. All right, the blueness of the sky is real.
Yeah.
The love in true love is real. All right, things like that. Like, I don't know that I go for some kind of rigorous attempt to theorize all these univocally, but I think they very closely cluster around this idea of reality in various respects. So to say it that you're a true, X is a true man, for example, which is an ancient usage. It has all this stuff about virtue, honesty, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's very closely related to some, like we would if we said that someone was, really there, really present, or something like that. You'd be very close to this sense. So, like, what I guess the point is, like, okay, it could be a scatter family resemblance term. Now let's also ask the question: can we say something interesting about what those bits of the family have in common? Do you see what I mean? Like,
yeah, I feel like we're negotiating. I would accept if what you're essentially doing is saying, look, I think that there are certain dominant nodes of the resemblance base, right?
Yes.
I would probably accept that. The problem with going stronger than that, it seems to me, is that, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds of a sort of an Austinian analysis, but some of the uses that I indicated, I don't see how you connect those specifically with reality. So, for example, the word when we use the word truism, we're actually, in a sense, saying something negative. We're saying that actually it's not apt, right?
Right. True.
Because it's trivial and uninteresting. And so that's a use of it that actually has a negative connotation. And the other one is the grandmother's tried and true method of getting rid of wine stains. I mean, that means effective.
Or it's the real way to get rid of the wine stain. It's a non-fictional way.
Is that a reasonable paraphrase of effective, a reconceptualization of effectiveness, do you think?
I mean, it really gets
things are effective that are placebos, right?
It really gets rid of the wine stain. In reality, it removes.
I'm not right. Like I said, I don't want to get in the weeds, but you see what the issue I'm raising, right?
Yes. I don't think I can do much of anything with truism actually along these lines. I'd have to probably think about that. And there might be a number of other outliers, but then again, why is something an outlier? And
because there's a dominant set of no. So I accept you're not trying to you're certainly not giving a definition. And
well, I do though. I mean, but it depends on how I'm not sure how seriously I mean it in a way. So
you're not giving a definition in the old-fashioned sense of necessary and sufficient conditions that are independent of sort of. You're identifying a dominant set of resemblances, is what you're saying.
Okay, so my definitions, insofar as I say one, is what is true. What is not is false. Okay, so like it's supposed to be constructed parallel to Aristotle, right? Who says that to say of what is that it is true, and to say of what is that it is not is false, and it goes on from there a couple more lines. So one thing when I shift off of to say, to speak the truth and go to the truth, what is true is also to move off of the exclusive semantic bearers.
Right, and that's what I don't quite understand is that in Aristotle's formulation, the one you just gave, the truth bearer is clearly semantic.
Yes.
And look, it's what he's doing is giving a version of the correspondence theory, okay?
Yes.
Now you are not giving a version of the correspondence theory. You're giving what you call an identity theory. And what
it's a version of what's known as the identity theory, maybe, yeah.
What I don't understand is then, does that mean that you're abandoning the idea that truth is a relation?
Yes. But
that was a long
but see, then I want to, yes, because truth can be a, true love. Well, maybe that is a relation, isn't it? True colors or whatever. I'm trying to encompass the uses that don't seem to refer to a relation. But then I need to pull off of that to account for the semantic cases. Like that's still going to leave open. It doesn't answer the main traditional question, which is, what is it that makes a semantic truth bearer, a sentence, true? And one problem with the formulation is that if I say what is true, and then actually my feeling of the semantic truth bearers, my view of the semantic truth bearers is that they have to be specific utterances and inscriptions.
Yeah. Well, about which I have another question, but we'll get to that.
Okay, so but say if what is true, that would count every utterance as true that actually occurs, right? Like in other words, because each such utterance is, so it's true.
Yeah.
On my view. So then I need to pull off and try, and I do this fairly elaborately, try to give a kind of specialized account of the semantic cases,
right?
But that preserves the fundamental, that truth and fact and reality are sort of all the same notion in some way.
Right. What this is one of the things I think is really fascinating about it, and why I think it's like the whole book, it's just fucking original, all right, which is so freaking refreshing. Given that everything is so recycled.
I feel the same.
But for you, the semantic conception of truth is not the primary one.
True, that's right.
The primary conception of truth is the non-semantic one, that then the semantic, you have to give an account of the semantic in turn. So in other words, you're inverting.
Yes.
You in a sense are the exact opposite of a deflationist, right? So a deflationist says, right, to say that snow is white is true is equivalent to saying snow is white. And what you're saying is snow is white is true, right? The fact is itself the truth, right?
Right.
And the semantic is in terms of it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which it's hard to even express.
Yes.
And so maybe then let me ask you this then. Truth is then not a property of fundamentally of linguistic. In other words, does the theory of truth then become a part of metaphysics?
Yes, I think that's fair. And of course, that's going to make many analytic philosophers or anyone that was attracted to the deflationist program very uncomfortable. That's exactly what they were trying to avoid, like a whole bunch of metaphysical commitments.
Yeah,
that are necessary to keep using the concept.
Yeah. So let me ask you. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Well, one thing, look, it's true that snow is white means the same as snow is white.
Right.
It's also the case that snow is white means the same as it's true that snow is white. In other words, you can deflate it by saying you can get rid of it, but actually maybe you haven't gotten rid of it. I mean, the thing is, it's everywhere all the time. In other words, you've shown that you don't need to say it, but you haven't shown that you don't need to think it or that you're not asserting it.
Yeah.
So to me, the deflationist program, I run it the other way.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like to me. Yeah. In a sense, the deflationist program wants to do philosophy of language without metaphysics.
Yes.
You want to do metaphysics without philosophy of language, it seems to me.
Well put, exactly.
Yes. The question is, maybe in the second edition, you can give me a little back rub. But let me ask you though. I mean, and maybe this is just simply the fact that it's such an entrenched idea that the semantic is primary. It just sounds awfully strange to say that reality is true.
It does.
Well, yeah, because and that's what I said. Maybe this is just a relic of the overemphasis of the semantic use, but I don't know what it means to say that the sun is true, right? The sun is a ball of gas, right?
Yes.
What does it mean to say the sun is true?
Well, it means to say it's real. But
right.
But that doesn't sound right though. Right?
It sounds linguistically deviant. I mean, it sounds semantically deviant to speak that way. Now, that, of course, is not necessarily an indication of anything. But do you think that really just is a function of the overemphasis of the semantic use? Or do you think that it does reflect a difficulty that you're going to have in cashing the idea out?
Well, I think in many circumstances you can easily paraphrase a statement about truth as a statement about reality and vice versa. But there are some cases where you can't do that, and or it's not natural to do it. To say of a single object like the sun that it is true it's a puzzling locution. It's not a natural locution.
But to say that the sun is real is not a puzzling locution. And so the question then is, I use the word I use the word real both ways, right? I can say that the sun is hot is true. That the sun is hot. The sun is really hot, right? It really is the case that the sun is hot.
You just said the same thing twice, right?
Right. And I can also say that the sun is real. And I mean real in the same way, right?
And the heat of the sun is real.
Right. I mean real. But why can't I then say, if real and true mean the sort of same thing, why can't I say that the sun is true without it sounding so odd?
Right. And I guess I'm going to squirrel out of this a little bit. Like, I think that in ordinary language, there often are these, this is one reason why we have many words that are approximate synonyms. There are cases where you definitely can't swap true and real. There are many cases where you can.
Yeah.
I feel like the basic notion is the same notion, but it's true that a competent English user would not say, except in some bizarre circumstances, the sun is true. They might say,
is that just due to peculiarities of grammar, or is that something more deep along the lines of, well, they're not really synonyms, real and true?
Well, they're not perfect synonyms, and that shows that, I think. But they're very close, conceptually. And I guess I'm going to be satisfied with that.
No, I'm satisfied with that too. I'm not a Phrygian. I don't have to have these sort of perfect senses matching so you can substitute them into context. No, I'm satisfied with that also. I just want to be clear on it.
I see the problem, though. I mean, yeah.
Let me ask you, why don't you have the same problem as the correspondence theorists in the following sense? All right. So here's one major problem with the correspondence theory. And that is ultimately you could argue it's circular or question begging, right? Because you say whatever you make as the truth maker, it's very hard to see how you could fully express it without using the word expression, without using the concept of truth, right? So it's very difficult to see how you could cash out the notion of corresponding to reality, corresponding to the fact. Any effort to sort of really give a thorough account of the fact or reality is going to either tacitly or explicitly employ the concept of truth. And so part of the problem with the correspondence theory is there's no non-question begging way to make sense of the idea of the facts or reality. Why, in a sense, don't you have the same problem?
Okay. One thing, I'm sympathetic to some of the stuff you said in the sense that I think you're again saying that truth and reality and a fact are very, very closely connected, right? Like, if I think they are the very same notion in some sense,
I see.
I mean, no wonder it's circular, right?
Right. It's not a vicious circularity because you're not saying that you're not offering. Well, it kind of is.
Right, but maybe it is though, right? I'm just paraphrasing. I'm just saying the same thing again, and that's not. All right. Well, all right. In terms of relation to the correspondence theory, let me try to just say a little bit about what I actually think the truth bearer is in the semantics.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm not. So first of all, I think you have to start with the utterance or inscription, rather than with an abstract object like a sentence or a proposition. I've got like a lot of arguments for that. One of them would just be sarcasm. So in other words, like a tone of voice is sufficient to reverse the meaning of a sentence to its negation. Okay? So what that would indicate is that you can't evaluate the sentence or the proposition for truth at all. You have to know what kind of tone of voice it's offered in, and you have to be acquainted with the conventions of sarcasm and so on.
So can I ask you, just before you move on, and part of this is because I want the audience to understand what some of the standard sort of way this conversation goes.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the reasons why, and I think it's a strong reason why people have argued that you should apply truth to propositions rather than to sentences or utterance tokens is because if you apply the concept of truth to sentences or utterance tokens, then you also have to bring on board some account of translation. And that is a notoriously fucked up. I mean,
or just even synonymy, right?
Yeah, just Quine and Davidson by themselves are enough to make you worry. And it's worth noting that both Quine and Davidson are it's almost like they see the whole area as kind of radioactive.
Yes.
And so, so are you confident enough that you can give an account of translation such that there's no reason to? Because I agree with you as to the positive reasons for attaching truth to utterance tokens or to sentences as opposed to, but I don't know that I'm confident that I have an account of translation that's gonna.
Yeah, I might have to write a check on that too, because I haven't really tried to work this idea through all those arguments.
So if it applies to an utterance, to a sentence, as opposed to a proposition, then it's going to be, quote, snow is white, unquote, is true in English.
Right.
If and only if snow is white. Whereas if it applies to the population, you don't need the true in L because the French sentence, the German sentence express the same proposition, right?
Right.
So what I'm just curious, do you even have a working idea of what you're going to say about translation, or do you just bracket the whole thing and say, here are the reasons for applying it to utterances, and I'm going to leave all that stuff over there?
Well, no, I mean, I probably have something to say. I mean, all right, so I maybe I need the objection precise before, I really should work through the Quine stuff. But so look, snow is white. You can't evaluate for truth at all.
Right.
Okay? Because you have to know whether it's meant sarcastically.
Yeah.
Snow is white is true only if snow is white is false.
Right. Like if you're standing in the middle of Manhattan looking at a pile of black snow and you go, hey, look, snow is white. Right. I mean, clearly you're meaning that it isn't. Right.
Right. So what are we going to translate?
Right. Right.
So in other words, we have to translate what is meant in some sense.
Right.
And I think that so the translation project is going to be incredibly elaborate.
Yeah. It's actually going to go beyond
utterance.
It's going to go beyond the Quine. It's going to have to include Gricean implicature.
Yeah.
And
And it's probably indeterminate, ultimately or something like that. Like you can't really solve that probably. Or at least I've never figured out how to. But I think like in principle, the problems aren't totally different, I suppose. I mean, I really have to think about that though. Like I have not enough.
No, I just noticed that you didn't say anything about it in the book.
Yeah,
and I wondered whether it's because you just sort of bracketed that as a mountain you got to climb separately, sort of.
I didn't maybe fully cognize it as a problem, but now I am.
Yeah.
But I need to really work on it.
Yeah, no, I did not mean to put you on the spot. It was just and this reflects the way you're educated, but the way I was taught this was there's all these reasons to apply it to utterances. The problem is that the reason why people have also said we should apply to proposition is that then you skip the whole problem of translation.
True.
So anyway, keep going. Yeah.
All right.
About the relation and why it's not question begging or viciously circular to simply identify the true as the real.
Right. Okay. So my considered position on what a truth bearer is in the semantic case, and like this is really going to take us to a different kind of framework, but is that it's not. In fact, it's not the utterance in isolation, and it's certainly not the sentence or the proposition, whatever exactly those things are. It is the situation embedding the speaker and the facts, say, that's referred to, and the environment between them that makes like an interchange between them possible, and a set of linguistic conventions, social conventions, that's partly in the head of the utterer, but is like a social fact spread across the population, so that I'm sort of going to move. Yeah, and this is a metaphysical move, right? Like I'm moving off of anything linguistic, anything exclusively linguistic. I'm moving. So what's true is my whole situation. And like, for example, I think that part of what's involved is a ethical situation of the speaker or the believer. And maybe that's marked in the uses of true as keeping faith, right? Or so that, I think what's true is like a very elaborate ethico, metaphysico, aesthetic, epistemic situation or something like that.
Yeah. I'm realizing now that actually the whole conversation is a little bit unfair in the following sense, and that is, I don't know that any of the views in the book are done justice when they're pulled out of the system. Because now what you're starting to say sounds a lot to me like what you talk about in the ontology with objects being knots, right?
Exactly.
In other words, it's such a weird way of thinking if you pull it out. When you put them all together. So in other words, what I was thinking as you were just describing, I'm like, wait a minute, you're going too fast. It sounds to me like all I need to do is say that truth applies to utterance tokens, right? And thus, truth is more a notion that belongs in linguistics to pragmatics than it does to semantics, right?
Okay.
But then you go further and say, no, what's true is the whole situation. It's not just the utterance token. And that then says, I'm saying, what the hell is that supposed to mean? I don't even understand it. But then when I started thinking about the ontology, I'm like, oh, of course, this is a system.
Yes.
So his metaphysics is equally off the ranch, right? I mean, he's arguing almost for a kind of Spinozistic.
It's
everything
true.
is just this fabric, right? And then we individuate by these permutations in the fabric.
Exactly. And also, I want to, and a key moment of that is that I want us in these situations fully. Okay, in other words, I don't want to distinguish us or our syntax or our language from the order of physical reality at all.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah.
Now that's going to eliminate most of the traditional theories of truth, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of these things, it seems to me, depend on a picture of human beings and human intellection and human belief and human representation that in principle separates it from the world.
Yeah.
And then no wonder a gulf opens up, right? You're sitting there going like, how can my syntax possibly reach out to the world? But then, underneath this,
it doesn't have to reach out to the world because it is the world.
That's right.
It's the world, right? I mean, in that sense.
And the world is coming at you right through your eyes and stuff like that, man.
Yeah.
Or right, it is your body, among other things. And
it gives a whole new meaning to "we are the world," right? I mean,
exactly.
But this is so damn interesting. But it also makes me realize something I was asking you in the very first dialogue we did in the book. And that is why a system, right? And I guess what I'm wondering is, I almost agree. And since it's funny, I keep marveling at how much I agree with all the bits and pieces, and then but to find myself in the opposite position. And that I wonder if it solely comes down to your desire for a system. In other words, this whole picture of everything being one fabric and everything, individuation being knots in the fabric and all that is really fucking strange, right?
No.
Wait. The way I would handle it is simply by accepting multiple fragmentary accounts, right? In other words, rather than you only have to get a kind of a weird or off the map picture if you insist on a system, right? In other words, I wonder if the weirdness is a result of the insistence on being systematic, as opposed to handling all these problems piecemeal and not insisting upon.
Right. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I guess I think that this approach yields a better conception of truth, but you might not feel that way. You know what I mean?
I understand.
It does recapitulate the ontology, which gets recapitulated in every chapter in one way or another.
Yeah.
But in my head, that's because it sheds light on all these different areas. But this is exactly the danger of system making, right? Like you start to see your own idea everywhere, man, and you don't see anything else.
Right.
And the objections kind of dissipate,
Right.
as you concentrate on this coherent thing you're making.
Yeah.
And I think like to avoid that danger, and maybe as just like an expression of humility or an quest of knowledge, this idea like let's proceed piecemeal. We don't need an overarching.
That's
theory
my inclination. That's my inclination always.
Yeah. And yes, I can't help it.
Yeah, I think it's because of your deep loves. I mean, you have these sort of, you talked about Kierkegaard, you talked about,
Right.
I mean, there's sort of things that
Emerson.
that go very deep into you that I think are almost temperamental. And I'm not saying this to suggest that that in any way renders doubtful the quality or usefulness of the system, or what you do. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you think are the advantages to sort of trying to give an account of truth rather than say, okay, there's semantical truth over there. We're going to deal with it in this very minimalistic way. And then there are these other uses of truth that don't apply to semantic objects. We're going to deal with them as a sort of system of family resemblances. And we're done. Goodbye. I'm going to go have lunch. That's my inclination. Maybe it's just because I'm lazy. Maybe it's because I'm shallow. What do you see as the advantage of not taking that way? What are you getting? What are you getting that I'm not getting out of what you're doing? Right.
Well, I guess like you don't want to over theorize. You don't want to force things into a system. You do want to see to what extent you can make these things hang together. So like if you were to proceed piecemeal, I think you could probably do everything you really need to do for most purposes and just leaving it piecemeal. And actually, it end up being truer. It would end up being more accurate overall, just like the pieces. But I think that then you might wonder, okay, like how far could we go to bring these together into some kind of coherent framework? And I think that's a worthwhile question. It's not the only question. It is, it's a kind of obsessional question with me, which is, I guess, why I end up running a system. I would really like to release. I don't want to make very, very strong coherence claims or like too much, just be too prideful of how much you can account for one of these theories or what they're doing. So the overall ontological framework, I want to say, like, its basic status is an attempt to see how much of this we could fit into an overall coherent framework. I really see the danger, though, of losing the data, you know what I mean? Or just like, because I think systematic philosophy did that terribly, right? Like if you're Hegel or Schelling or Fichte, Schopenhauer, you just went on with your idea and covered everything with it and lost the material you were trying to account for, it seems to me. And I am worried that that's happening here,
It seems to me like, look, and I was actually thinking, it's funny. I mean, I think you and I have a sort of a weird connection. I was thinking as you started talking, what he's doing is really more like continental philosophy, actually, in a sense, because my inclination is always ask you, okay, what problems are you solving with this? Right? That can't be solved by the piecemeal approach. And your answer is, I'm not trying to solve problems. And you even admitted, in a sense, the piecemeal approach probably gets things more accurate in terms of the problems. But that you think that there is a value to going a lot deeper and trying to see if there are sort of subterranean relations that will then give you a very atypical, not normal picture of the overall, right? And then
I think it's common sense, man. My own picture, I think it's like it's.
Well, but I mean, listen, the common sense view of the world is that that things are discrete and individual relative to one another, and that many of their relations are indeed abstract, right? I mean, they're not.
Common sense.
My relation to you as a buddy is not like my relation to you as being tied together with a rope, right? I mean, in other words, I'm not disparaging. What I'm getting at is
it is like being tied together with a rope.
What I'm getting is that when you go that deep, because the relations are in a sense much more fundamental and removed from the level of appearances, right? You get a picture that sort of at least strikes as being weird, right? I mean, certainly Spinoza on its face is weird,
yes,
right?
Very.
Now you could argue fundamentally it isn't, but I'm not denying that. And
Right.
What I'm wondering is, okay, if you're not trying to solve problems in the analytic sense, what are you trying to do?
Right.
And it sounds to me like it's more just like the pursuit of pure understanding in the Greek sense, or something more like what the continental philosophers are trying to do, right? Like some of the people you mentioned, where the reward is great, but the risk is also great. Right? I mean,
no, that's right. And in a way, like, I really respect the modesty of analytic philosophy, and I also understand the philosophical reasons for it. So, because I think the worst mistakes in the history of philosophy came from this kind of overweening, I'm going to explain the universe to you now as a whole. So like the pretensions of philosophy and its inability to pay off on those pretensions, you know, by the time you get to Moore and Russell around 1900 or whatever, they're just going like, what are you talking about? Like, let's tackle something we can tackle, because this is just ridiculous. I don't even know if I could evaluate this for truth. And who cares anyway? All right, so let's see what we can actually do with some logical tools or something to clarify something specific. But I got into philosophy because I was trying to, like, I couldn't stop thinking about what this whole reality is and what I'm doing in it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, I feel like, and then I got my analytic training or whatever. I released those questions in a way, like in my work, like I stopped talking about them maybe, but I didn't stop thinking about them. And then I was like trying to see, okay, like, would any of these tools be of use in that project? Or if we took on board some of the modesty of the analytic project in the face of German idealism, could we reconstruct, I mean, how could we still pursue the project of like the nature of this whole thing and us in it?
Yeah.
In a way that didn't have that kind of incredible arrogance and incomprehensibility finally, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if like let's just say that tension just lurks within me all the time. Like, I'm drawing these giant conclusions. How could they possibly be justified? Yeah. And what good are they going to do anyone? Although I'm not sure they won't, I guess, but you know.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, it's really fitting that Richard Rorty was your advisor. I mean, Richard, what you've just described is in a sense what Richard Rorty tried to do. He tried to bring analytic clarity and modesty to what he saw as continental philosophy's more interesting and important questions, right?
Yes.
And
I've been reading Continental this whole time too, though.
Yeah. And I think if you'd been trained in a continental program, if you'd been trained in France, this would not be as no, you know what I mean? This is hard, but it's readable, and it's you know what I mean? It's not like reading Hegel, it's not like reading Fichte, it's not like reading Heidegger, that's for sure.
Or Derrida, yeah.
Right. It aims at clarity, and it does. I will say it exudes modesty. You never overstate. You always sort of you reach wide, but you express hesitation. It seems to me you never seem sort of, you know, right. And I mean, go ahead. What I was trying to avoid is what you get in the preface of Phenomenology of the Spirit or the Critique of Pure Reason, where they say like, okay, here's the final answer to all questions, man. Like, aren't you glad the human race will be grateful forevermore for this? Right.
Like, you know what I mean? And then, you know, of course it's refuted 20 times, or although they had good runs, but yeah, and I'm trying not to go insane. Okay, like if you are a person who thinks they figured out the entire nature of the universe or whatever. Like, that sounds crazy even in the philosophy department, right? Yeah. So I need to pull back on some of it. I don't want to become a monster.
Right.
You know, like,
or become sort of self-deceiving, right? I mean,
Yes, exactly.
that's always sort of, the worst thing that a philosopher can do is become self-deceiving. And, it's funny that you and I behind the scenes, because I just had a piece come out in Philosophy Now. And one of the things I actually say at the end, towards the end, is that I lament the fact that you really can't do systems anymore, even though I'm not a systems guy. But, in other words, I think systems done with the right attitude about them are really what is exciting in philosophy, right? Of course it's a little ridiculous. Of course the idea of a theory of everything is ridiculous.
It's quixotic, yes.
That's also what's compelling about it. And,
I read that piece and I really liked it a lot. And, one thing is like, I think, how about some courage? You know what I mean? Like, just like, let's take a shot at it. Why not? If we want to. Okay, so like if you want to pursue more modest projects or whatever, like absolutely, man, clarify this area, that area.
Yeah.
But if someone's just in the mood, like, why is that verboten?
Yeah.
And I mean, the whole idea of analytic philosophy, I think, is, as you said in this piece, right, is like, it's trying to bring philosophy in line with science, or use science as an analogy for the kind of knowledge that philosophy might use, or use philosophy as a handmaiden to science. I see why they did that, because a lot of 19th century like German idealism is discreditable. It's discrediting in a way.
It's kind of an overreaction is what it is, right? I mean,
yes. And so like a lot of the fun, interesting possibilities of philosophy, a lot of the profound possibilities of philosophy were eliminated a priori. Like, you just can't possibly undertake that project. But my reaction is like, I can undertake it if I feel like it, and then let's see what comes out.
Yeah.
But very few people are working that way. And I just wish like there was more welcome for like just sort of creativity, or like, here's my crazy project, let's give it a shot.
Here's my gigantic, sprawling, crazy idea.
Yeah.
But guess what? It's going to give rise to 50 really interesting conversations, right?
It might. I hope so, right? Exactly.
And what you simply cannot do that in professional philosophy, at least not in the analytic tradition today. I suspect you can't even really do it in the continental either.
No, not really.
There's now a kind of a system in place where you have to basically, and everything you say, you have to be invoking the contemporary literature. You cannot sort of just, here's 10 propositions, let's talk about them, right?
I think there's maybe a little more space for, I mean, some do, some don't. It usually does kind of almost start as interpretation, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And I have the opposite problem to you. I mean, your problem is to try to rein yourself in. My problem is to try to figure out some reason why I'd want to do any philosophy, right? In other words, given my commitments, later Wittgenstein, ordinary language philosophy, Anscombe and moral philosophy, as far as I'm concerned, there's actually hardly anything left to do, right?
That's sort of what I'm trying to do too. Like a lot of my ideas, the way I've hoped for them is that they would revivify the conversation, right? Like, knowledge is merely true belief.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure how seriously I meant that when I first put it forward. I'm not sure if it was a provocation in my graduate seminar, or almost like a flippant joke or something like that. It sure as hell started a conversation, though.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? And so, like, I thought I was making a contribution to the field, even by undercutting the basic assumptions, just because that was going to press you to defend the basic assumptions or adjust them or something, And so I think we need some work at that kind of level too, even to keep the detailed projects, to create new detail projects, or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Or to remind people who are in the weeds of the detail project what the fucking project is, right? I mean, there's a serious forest trees problem. I would say, 80% of analytic philosophers have no idea what the forest is anymore, right? I mean, they're just like, they're examining the trees with microscopes, and which should never have been philosophy's job, and it's not something we do particularly well. That's why I love projects like yours, in that I think that they you really are not. You're refusing to do what they're making us do.
Right. Yes. Right,
nice.
The other thing is like how are we portraying philosophy to non-philosophers?
Yeah.
Okay. What do non-philosophers expect from philosophy? What do they, or what might we want them to? I guess. I mean, so these very detailed, products of moral psychology or something. I mean, they might have some kind of application, but I still think like maybe people want philosophers to grapple with the meaning of life and stuff like that. Like, I know that sounds, and I understand exactly why many analytic philosophers would just go like, yeah, right, the meaning of life. All right. But so I love the classical philosophical project, right?
Yeah.
Of really trying to figure out this.
Yeah.
In a big way. Like, that's why I wanted to do this.
Yeah. And the Greeks sort of really balanced the ambitious questions with the rigorous undertaking of those.
Aristotle's a beautiful example of that, right?
Whereas, I think the analytic philosophers kept, we have the rigor, but we lost, like I said, we lost the forest. And the continental philosophers have the forest, but man, it's just a lot of really fucking sloppy, bad.
It's a tangle. It's
bad reasoning. I mean, just flat out bad reasoning. And
well, I don't know. I wouldn't condemn the whole area like that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
well, no, but I mean, I'm condemning all of analytic philosophy. Is not all like that either. I'm just part of painting. We each have. It seems to me they each share one half of the problem that the Greeks kind of got right. The Greeks kind of got the combination right. It seems to me between the big idea and the rigor, right?
Yeah, and then furthermore, the application to practical living.
Yeah, yeah,
right, like all those things.
Yeah,
and so and that's what we think. I think that's where we get our concept of philosophy.
Yeah,
and we've abandoned most of it, right?
Yeah, and that's why in the book, I guess, the arc sort of takes you from the most abstract to the practical, right? To the whole latter parts of the book. We did the whole second dialogue we did was on the political philosophy, right? I mean, all the stuff about truth and ontology and epistemology.
Yeah.
The point of it ultimately is to get you to that practical section, right? Is to get you to the point, to give you the apparatus, the toolbox, right, in a sense, with which to approach how should we live questions. Right?
Well, I hope so. Although, in my own mind, the how we should live questions are actually secondary. Like what really absorbs me is the abstract general questions. I keep trying to issue out into the practical, but
so in that sense, you're not like the Greeks. You're more like
they had some pretty speculative.
No, they did, but I think ultimately they thought the ultimate purpose of this was for politics, right? I mean, that's what ultimately to them.
Well, I guess I sort of did set it up that way too. I returned from my journey out of the cave back to help politically, sort of, but yeah, I'm not sure what I think about that. But I just want to say, I'm definitely intrinsically involved, whatever the outcome, with the metaphysical questions. You know what I mean? I'm intrinsically interested in those. Yeah. Whatever the result.
You would be interested in those even if you weren't interested in practical politics.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me just ask you, just in wrapping up, with respect to the theory of truth, you explained your version of the identitarianism, the fact that, the true simply is the real. They're not quite real and true are not quite synonyms because you can't always substitute them, but that doesn't matter. You sort of acknowledge the potential problem of a circularity in the account between the real and the true, but whether it's vicious or not will depend. I guess what I wanted to sort of ask you just in closing on this is, how hesitant are you? In other words, I don't know what your planned future projects are and whether you're going to develop elements of this book further, whether you're ever going to return to this question of truth again, or whether you're kind of done with it. But I guess what I would ask is, what do you see if you were to do more with it? What needs still to be done? What do you think is missing still? Is it just an account of translation? It seems to me like the most of the work you need to do is still on the semantical side, even though that seems to be the side that interests you the least, right?
it has to be on the semantic side because that's where the history of the theory of truth is really. And also because I don't, on my own account, I don't adequately, specifically, I don't provide a theory that would be a straight rival to Tarski or something like that. Do you know what I mean? Or,
yeah.
I can see doing a lot more work, like many different directions, including things like translation. I mean, you have to work philosophy of language through this in a much more elaborate way in multiple dimensions.
Yeah.
Now, my own plans, though, I got to say, I probably won't work on it more systematically unless a discussion of my work on this emerges. You see what I mean? Like, in other words, like, I'm like right now, I feel like I'm tossing these things into the void. So like I just did like 100 pages on truth or whatever. I worked on it for 7 years or something, you know? And yes, many questions remain, but
that's the advantage of journal articles, right? I mean, as a purely practical matter, you're more likely to get a response.
True.
And have somebody start an argument with you.
Maybe not, though.
If you did a journal piece, this is a purely practical. You wouldn't be interested in pulling any of the pieces out of this and publishing them as journal pieces, would you?
Yes.
Yeah, you might be. Yeah.
Sure.
Here's one of the things that just occurred to me thinking about this. One of the things I'd ask you is your account closer to a correspondence account or closer to a deflationist account? Because I could see you saying both, right?
Yeah.
Right? Truth is true and the real are just the same. That sounds deflationary, right? On the other hand, it does sound to me like whenever you talk about the real, it sounds to me like a correspondence theory. So I mean, and I guess it comes down to whether you ultimately view truth as relational or not.
Yeah, well, it has to be relational in some way with regard to the semantic entities.
Right.
Yeah. Now, and first of all, I like correspondence better than the pragmatic theory. I like it better than the coherence theory because it gives you some metaphysical realism. At least it leaves that possibility open.
Right.
Yeah, because the others are idealisms.
Right.
If you ask me.
Right.
And so that's just wrong.
But between correspondence and deflationary, what do you think you were trying more to lean towards in your own mind?
Okay, I want a re-inflationary theory. Let's try that. So like I say, snow is white is true if and only if snow is white. Snow is white if and only if snow is white is true. Okay? So again, I want to find truth everywhere. It's dispensable because it's indispensable. It's dispensable because it's ubiquitous. It's dispensable because it's in every assertion, every belief, and every moment, and every place. Right? So in a way, that's the opposite of deflationism because I'm like really a truth monger.
Yeah.
And a reality monger.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I'm taking quite seriously the basic deflationist equivalence or something like that.
Yeah. It seems to me that you're going to have the problem is for you, it seems to me, is that on the semantical side, because you very much want to have this sort of metaphysical realism, you want to be a realist, that pushes you in the direction of some sort of robustly relational correspondence view. The problem is that then drives apart your semantical conception of truth and the conception of truth you want to apply in the non-semantical side. The trouble is, if you go deflationary, you're either going to have to say that truth is redundant, or you're going to have to say that truth is a disquotational device, right? The word true simply lifts quotes off of things, right?
Right.
But then you're going to lose that robust relation to reality, right? And so I wonder.
Well, truth is redundant. It's okay with me. In other words, like it is. Another way to put this is it's absolutely essential. Every time it's there.
How could it be redundant and essential at the same time?
Because it's redundant because it's always there and you know it is. The whole activity is incomprehensible of like believing, asserting, having a conversation is incomprehensible without this like continual atmosphere of truth. Yeah. And that's and it's redundant in the sense that you don't have to say it usually.
Okay, it's not redundant. Saying it is redundant.
Although we do say it a lot.
The reason I'm pushing is because, to me, redundant and necessary are almost antonymous, right? Right?
Or they're almost synonymous.
If something is something is redundant, if somebody's rendered redundant, it means they're rendered unnecessary, right?
Well, yeah, in the employment case.
All right, we're going to get into the weeds of Austinian analysis of redundant.
If something's redundant, it's already been said. It's already read. It's already there.
Right.
Like, you don't have to say it because it's already there.
Yeah.
I already said it.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, but anyway.
Anyway, these are the places where I see you're going to have to, and you're going to have to say something about translation if you're going to apply these to utterance tokens.
And I appreciate these points, man.
Because that is the standard problem. I mean, that's what drives people to propositions, is that they don't know what the fuck to say about translation.
And I hardly discuss that.
Yeah.
I gave some examples of translation, but I didn't work the problem.
Yeah. All right. Well, Crispin, as always, I love talking to you.
Likewise, man.
It's the closest I ever get to feeling like I used to feel in college when I hang out with my friends, right, at night, and you know, and this is the version you can do when you're 55 years old, right?
Exactly. Oh man, I appreciate that, Dan. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking with you again really soon.
Peace.
All right, take care, my friend.